Heracles, a name whispered in awe, Olympian champion, monster slayer. Yet beneath the legend lurks a tormented soul, hands stained with family blood, a path littered with broken hearts, and a heritage as twisted as Zeus's desires. Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, the life and labors of Heracles. As Zeus, the king of the gods, sat on his throne on Mount Olympus, he gazed down upon the chaotic land of Greece. Wars ravaged the land, and dangerous beasts roamed freely. Zeus knew that a hero was needed to bring peace to the land, a hero he would father, destined to unite the people and rid the world of these monsters. This hero would be Heracles, later known by the Romans and Disney as Hercules. Zeus selected the beautiful Alcmena to be the mother of Heracles, for she was a descendant of the renowned hero Perseus. Slightly unsettling was the fact that Perseus was his illegitimate son, making Alcmena Zeus's granddaughter.
Ew!
Alcmena was married to King Amphitryon, who had gone to war. While Alcmena's husband was away at war, Zeus transformed himself into the appearance of Amphitryon and approached Alcmena. Alcmena, thinking her husband had returned from war, ran to him, embracing him, and they made love. The next day, the real King Amphitryon returned. Confused, Alcmena welcomed her husband home again and again lay with him. But Zeus didn't know that his wife Hera, the queen of the gods, was watching. She had tolerated Zeus's many affairs for ages, but this time she decided she had had enough. Zeus had always planned to father a king from the lineage of Perseus, hoping that it would be his son Heracles. Knowing this, Hera saw her chance for revenge. She forced her daughter Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to delay the birth of Heracles and his twin Iphicles long enough for Alcmene's cousin, who happened to also be pregnant, to give birth first. And so a boy named Eurystheus was born into Perseus's bloodline before Heracles or his brother, and so Heracles' cousin Eurystheus became king of Mycenae. Heracles was actually born with a mortal name, Alcaeus. But Zeus had thought it a good idea to name his illegitimate son and evidence of his infidelity, Heracles, which translates to Hera's glory. This only upset Hera further. Though Zeus couldn't reverse his son's lost kingdom, he would give his son every chance he could to be a hero king. After Heracles was born, Zeus brought him to Hera's bedchamber on Olympus. While she slept, Zeus placed the infant on Hera's breast, allowing Heracles to feed on her divine milk and gain some of her power. Startled, Hera awoke and threw the baby off, with milk spraying across the heavens. This divine milk settled in the sky, forming what we know as the Milky Way. Zeus chuckled as he returned Heracles to his crib beside his mother. On Olympus, Hera was enraged. Determined to kill Heracles, she sent 2 snakes into his crib. To her astonishment, Heracles simply giggled and seized a snake in each hand, strangling them with the strength he had just acquired from her. Hera glared down at the scene in fury, vowing to make Heracles' life as hard as possible. Growing up, Heracles received education from some of the finest masters in Greece, learning everything from archery to music to philosophy. However, it soon became clear that Heracles had trouble with his temper. Combined with his supernatural strength, this made him dangerous to both friends and foes. Linus, his music teacher, discovered this the hard way. While teaching Heracles to play the lyre, the young hero grew frustrated with the constant corrections. One day, after a particularly harsh critique, Heracles struck Linus on the back of the head with the lyre, killing him instantly. In one version, Heracles was tried in a court, he quoted a law of Rhadamanthus, which stated that whoever defends himself against a wrongful aggressor shall go free. And so he was acquitted and received only a minor punishment. His temper would cause problems throughout his life. Seeing this, Zeus decided it was time for Heracles to leave his sheltered life and embark on his first journey to gain humility and learn responsibility. Zeus sent Heracles to tend cattle on a farm in Thespia with his foster father, Amphitryon. While living this simple farmer's life, Heracles encountered two women. The first was a woman named Caecia, also known as Vice. She was alluring and seductive. She promised him comfort and luxury without any hard work, starting with a simple kiss and proclaiming herself the goddess of bliss. The other woman, Arete, also known as Virtue, urged Heracles to reject Vice's offer. She promised a life of honor and achievement where luxuries were earned through hard work and perseverance. Virtue highlighted that true fulfillment comes from facing challenges and enduring hardships. Inspired by Virtue's words, Heracles chose the path of virtue and sent Vice away. Heracles worked diligently as a cattle herder, learning the value of hard work and discipline. His strength and skills grew, and so did his reputation. Soon, tales of a ferocious lion terrorizing the lands around Mount Cithaeron reached his ears. Determined to protect the people and prove his valor, Heracles set out to find and defeat the Ceryneian Lion. With his immense strength, Heracles wrestled the lion to the ground and strangled it with his bare hands. King Thespius of Thespia, grateful for Heracles' help in ridding his land of the lion, welcomed him into his home. Over the next 50 days, Thespius entertained Heracles, and over the next 50 days, Heracles fathered 50 sons with the 50 daughters of Thespius. With each passing day, Heracles' fame and strength grew, but so did the jealousy and anger of Hera. Heracles' adventures on Mount Cithaeron were just the beginning of his journey. The real trials were yet to come. Heracles got his first taste of battle when his foster father, Amphitryon, the leading general of Thebes, was killed in a war with the neighboring Minyans. With his foster father dead, Heracles took command of the Theban army and marched against the Minyans. Along the way, Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, appeared before him, sent by Zeus to aid the young hero. She brought gifts from the gods, gleaming weapons and armor forged on Olympus. Heracles thanked the goddess and, armed with these divine gifts, led his troops into battle, avenging Amphitryon by defeating the Minyan armies. Upon his return to Thebes, Heracles was greeted by the grateful Theban king, who gave his daughter Megara in marriage. Heracles and Megara lived happily in Thebes for several years, having 3 children and earning the admiration of the townsfolk for Heracles' role in protecting the city. Heracles' good fortune was watched by many on Olympus, but none more closely than Hera. This wasn't what she had planned for the illegitimate son of her husband. Not only had this child stolen her power, but now he was in a happy marriage and poised to become the next king of Thebes. Hera wasn't going to stand for this disrespect. Heracles, unaware of Hera's plotting, came home one day to find his door broken down. Rushing inside, he discovered his family missing. As he called out for them, several hideous monsters emerged from the shadows, advancing towards him. Overcome with an unnatural rage, Heracles lashed out, killing one of the monsters instantly. The others tried to flee, but Heracles, in a blind fury, pursued and killed them all with his bare hands. Only then did Hera lift her spell, revealing the true horror. The monsters were his own family. Heracles stood in shock, seeing his wife and children lying dead before him. He desperately tried to wake them, tears streaming down his face, but it was too late. Hera's magic had done its work, leaving Heracles to live with the guilt of their deaths. Staring at his blood-stained hands, Heracles knew he had to atone for his crimes. In ancient Greece, the murder of a family member was one of the gravest offenses. Without atonement, the Furies, monstrous creatures from the Underworld, would hunt and torment him forever. Seeking guidance, Heracles exiled himself from Thebes and journeyed to the Oracle of Delphi. The oracle, a mouthpiece of Apollo, could deliver prophecies and guidance. However, Hera had influenced the oracle's words. When Heracles asked how to atone, the oracle told him he must serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae for 10 years, the same Eurystheus born moments before Heracles. As Heracles was about to leave, the oracle added that if he completed this service, his father Zeus would grant him immortality. Heracles bowed in thanks and set off for Mycenae, beginning his path to redemption. King Eurystheus had known of Heracles for some time and was deeply jealous of him. Although they were cousins, both descended from Perseus, they were very different. Heracles was strong and heroic, while Eurystheus was cowardly and weak, often sending others to fight his battles. When Heracles arrived to serve him, he bowed before Eurystheus, who could hardly hide his glee. Eurystheus didn't believe that Heracles' intentions were genuine, and believed that Heracles arrived wanting to take his throne. Eurystheus quickly accepted his service and instructed Heracles to complete 10 labors over 10 years, with the condition that he had no assistance or payment. Heracles lowered his head in shame and asked what the first labor would be. Eurystheus told him of a ferocious lion that had been terrorizing a village in the northeast part of his kingdom, Nemea. Unlike the Ceryneian lion Heracles had defeated earlier, the Nemean lion's golden hide was impervious to weapons, and its claws were sharper than any sword. He was said to be the son or the grandson of the giant Typhon, a giant so powerful that it had almost defeated Zeus and changed the course of Greek mythology. It had killed everyone sent against it, and now the task fell to Heracles to slay the beast. Knowing that no sword or spear could penetrate the lion's hide, Heracles trained for several months, uprooting trees and lifting boulders to increase his strength. Stronger than ever, he was ready to confront the beast with his bare hands. Arriving at the lion's den, Heracles saw the bodies of fallen warriors and their broken weapons scattered on the ground. As he walked through the lair, he stripped away the armor and weapons Athena had given him, calling out to the lion. The beast charged at him, but just before it could pounce, Heracles stepped aside and caught its neck in his arms. They wrestled for hours, but Heracles finally managed to grip the lion's throat and squeezed with all his might until he heard a crack. The dead beast fell to the ground, and his first labor was complete. Realizing the lion's pelt would help him in future labors, he used one of its razor-sharp claws to skin the animal. He then draped the pelt over his shoulders like a cloak and used the lion's head as a protective hood. As he left the lair, he passed the armor Athena had gifted him, leaving it behind as a symbol of his old life. He found a giant oak tree, uprooted it, and stripped its branches to make a club. This would be his new weapon, and the lion's skin, his new armor, symbols of his path to redemption. When Heracles returned to Mycenae, draped in the pelt of the Nemean Lion, Eurystheus was shocked, never expecting him to survive. For his second labor, Heracles was tasked with slaying the Lernaean Hydra, a monstrous water serpent dwelling in Lake Lerna near the city of Argos. This beast had 9 heads, one of which was immortal, and its blood was the most poisonous substance known to man. As Heracles set out to face this creature, Hera sought to make the challenge even harder by hiding a giant crab within the lake. Upon arriving at the lake, Heracles, emboldened by his victory over the Nemean Lion, charged towards the Hydra with his club. With a powerful swing, he severed one of the Hydra's heads, but to his horror, 2 new heads sprouted in its place. Bewildered, Heracles continued to hack off heads, but each time he did, more heads grew back. Adding to his troubles, Hera's giant crab emerged from the water, pinning Heracles to the ground. With both the Hydra and the crab attacking him, Heracles feared his end was near. Just then, an arrow flew out of the bushes and struck the Hydra. Heracles turned to see his nephew Iolaus aiming a bow at the beast. Iolaus had followed his uncle, determined to help. With the Hydra momentarily distracted, Heracles seized his club and crushed the giant crab with a single blow. With Iolaus by his side, Heracles found new hope. Iolaus devised a plan. As Heracles cut off a head, Iolaus would cauterize the neck with a flaming torch to prevent new heads from growing. Working tirelessly together, they sliced and cauterized until only the immortal head remained. Heracles then severed the immortal head and buried it under a large rock by the lake. Kneeling beside the Hydra's body, Heracles dipped the tips of his arrows in its poisonous blood, making them deadly weapons for future labors. Despite his victory, Eurystheus did not count this labor, arguing that Heracles had received help from Iolaus, and so an additional labor would be required, though Heracles was unaware of this at the time. As Heracles and Iolaus left the lake, Hera took the crab's remains and cast its image into the heavens, creating the constellation Cancer. For his third labor, Heracles was tasked with capturing the Ceryneian Hind and bringing it back alive to Eurystheus. The hind was a magnificent creature, much like a stag, with bronze-like hooves and splendid golden antlers. Eurystheus chose the hind because it was not only incredibly fast and nearly impossible to catch, but also sacred to the goddess Artemis, who used the animals to pull her chariot. Eurystheus believed that even if Heracles managed to capture the hind, Artemis would strike him down, as no mortal could stand against an Olympian. Heracles set off to Mount Cerynea and pursued the hind for a full year before he was able to capture it. Determined not to harm the animal, he waited for the right moment. When the hind ran towards the river Ladon, Heracles shot an arrow close by, startling it into the river. This slowed the hind down, just enough for him to catch it, bind its legs, and hoist it over his shoulder. Heracles then began his journey back to Mycenae, but as he stepped outside Mount Cerynea with the hind, the goddess Artemis descended from Olympus, bow drawn, accusing him of trying to harm her sacred creature. Heracles quickly dropped to one knee and explained that the blame lay with King Eurystheus. At that moment, Apollo, Artemis's twin brother, appeared and tried to calm the situation. He explained that Eurystheus was under the influence of Hera, who harbored resentment towards both Heracles and the twins as illegitimate children of Zeus. Apollo and Artemis, sharing Heracles' plight, found satisfaction in thwarting Hera's plans. Artemis agreed to let Heracles go on the condition that he released the hind once his labor was complete. Heracles thanked the goddess and returned to Eurystheus, who was astonished to see his cousin succeed yet again. After fulfilling his promise to Artemis and releasing the hind back into the wild, Heracles asked Eurystheus for his fourth labor. For his fourth labor, Eurystheus sent Heracles to Mount Erymanthus to capture a giant boar that had been terrorizing the area. Monstrous animals terrorizing towns seemed to be a common problem in ancient Greece. Heracles set off with enthusiasm, not thinking much of the task, and decided to visit his friend, the centaur Pholus, along the way. Centaurs were known for their wild nature, being half man and half horse, but Pholus was different. he was friendly and intelligent, having been friends with Heracles since his youth. Upon Heracles' arrival, Pholus decided to host a dinner party in his honor, inviting a few local centaurs, including Chiron, Heracles' wise, immortal archery teacher. The feast was a joyful occasion, with roast meat and lively conversation. Heracles reminisced with Chiron before stepping out for a walk. During his stroll, he discovered a jar of wine on Pholus's shelf and decided to open it, taking a large helping. But what Heracles didn't know was that the wine was a communal treasure gifted to the centaurs by the god Dionysus 4 generations earlier. Its powerful aroma spread for miles, attracting the attention of other centaurs. Returning to the feast, Heracles was confronted by a large group of centaurs, angry that he had drunk their wine. Despite Pholus and Chiron's attempts to calm them, the situation escalated as more centaurs arrived, drawn by the wine's scent. Enraged, they attacked Heracles. Although outnumbered, Heracles defended himself, using his arrows coated in Hydra's poisonous blood, killing many centaurs and forcing the rest to flee. Tragically, in the chaos, Heracles accidentally shot Chiron. As an immortal, Chiron could not die, but the poison condemned him to eternal agony. Zeus, witnessing the event, took pity on Chiron, lifted his spirit to the heavens, and created the constellation Sagittarius. Pholus, curious about the deadly arrows, picked one up to examine it. Accidentally, he dropped it and it struck his foot, killing him instantly. After chasing away the remaining centaurs, Heracles returned, only to find his friend and teacher dead. Overcome with shame and sorrow, he buried Pholus and paid his respects before continuing his quest to capture the Erymanthian Boar. Unbeknownst to Heracles, a centaur named Nessus survived the massacre and fled into the mountains, plotting revenge for over a decade. Heracles, however, successfully completed his labor by chasing the boar into deep snow and binding it in chains. He then brought the boar back to Eurystheus. Upon seeing the massive creature, Eurystheus was terrified and hid in a large storage jar, refusing to come out until Heracles removed the boar. Amused, Heracles complied and set the boar free. Embarrassed, Eurystheus crawled out of the jar and quickly sent Heracles on his 5th labor. For his 5th labor, Heracles was tasked with cleaning the Augean Stables in a single day, using only his hands and without any assistance. Eurystheus believed this task to be impossible and sent Heracles off, certain he would fail. The stables belonged to King Augeas of Elis and housed 3,000 immortal cattle. They had not been cleaned in 30 years, and the filth had piled meters high in some places. The smell was so awful that no one dared approach, and the dung had even overflowed into nearby pastures, rendering them unusable. Upon arriving in Elis, Heracles was greeted by an enthusiastic crowd. His fame had spread, and with the beasts that had plagued many villages now gone, people saw him as a hero. When he announced his intention to complete his 5th labor, the citizens encouraged him to visit King Augeas and ask for a reward. Convinced, Heracles visited the king, who promised him 1/10 of his immortal herd if he could complete the task by nightfall. Thinking Heracles would fail, King Augeas sent his eldest son, Phyleus, to observe. The stables were even more horrid than Heracles had imagined, spanning the length of a small city. The overwhelming smell and sheer amount of filth made the task seem impossible. Heracles decided to use the nearby rivers Alpheus and Peneus to help. He dug a canal with his bare hands without using any tools, redirecting the rivers into the stables. A torrent of water flooded in, washing away years of accumulated dung in an instant. The water then flowed into the surrounding farmland, fertilizing it with the rich manure. The people of Elis celebrated, cheering for Heracles as their farms would prosper for years to come. When King Augeas learned what Heracles had done, he was furious. He had only agreed to the reward because he thought the task was impossible. Though Heracles had adhered to the restrictions, using only his hands, Augeas refused to acknowledge that he had completed the task correctly and declined to pay him. Heracles proposed that the dispute be judged by the leading citizens of Elis, many of whom had witnessed the labor. During the trial, Augeas' son Phyleus testified that Heracles had fulfilled his side of the bargain. Enraged, King Augeas interrupted the trial, banishing both Heracles and Phyleus from Elis, claiming Heracles had cheated by using the river god's power. To make matters worse, Eurystheus refused to count this labor, arguing that Heracles had completed it for payment. Heracles, unaware of this at the time, began his journey back to Mycenae to receive his next labor. Though he could do nothing for now, he vowed to return after completing his labors. Eventually, he sought revenge on King Augeas, killing him and making Phyleus the new king of Elis. Heracles marked this occasion by founding the famous Olympic Games, held every 4 years in Elis. For his 6th labor, Heracles was tasked with driving away a flock of man-eating birds from Lake Stymphalian. These birds, sacred to Ares, had iron beaks capable of tearing through the toughest armor. When Heracles arrived at the lake, he quickly realized that the challenge was not in killing the birds, but in finding them among the dense, swampy marshland surrounding the lake. Even if he managed to find and kill some each day, it would take him well over a year to hunt them all down, a time he simply didn't have if he was to complete all his labors within 10 years. Fortunately for Heracles, his father, Zeus, was watching from the heavens. While Zeus couldn't intervene directly without further angering Hera, he asked the other gods to assist Heracles when possible. Athena, keeping watch over her half-brother, saw an opportunity to help. As Heracles surveyed the area, he suddenly heard the clanging of metal behind him. Turning around, he saw a godly figure vanish into the dense wood. Approaching, he found a set of bronze rattles resting on the fallen trunk of an old willow tree, their craftsmanship unmistakably divine. Grateful for the assistance, Heracles took the rattles to a nearby hill overlooking the marsh. The rattles did not sound particularly impressive to Heracles, but as he began to shake them, the noise caused the birds immense pain. Hundreds of birds rose from the lake, shrieking in agony. As the birds soared into the sky, they formed a massive flock, providing Heracles with a clear target. He drew back his bow and, using arrows dipped in the Hydra's blood, began shooting the birds, killing them instantly. Those who survived fled the lake in terror. With the birds gone, Heracles' labor was complete. For his 7th labor, King Eurystheus, realizing he had exhausted all difficult tasks within his own kingdom, sent Heracles to Crete for his next challenge. There, King Minos would provide the task. King Minos had received a beautiful white bull from Poseidon, with the expectation that it would be sacrificed in the sea god's honor. However, Minos decided to keep the bull, deeming it too magnificent to kill. In retaliation, Poseidon makes Minos' wife fall in love with the bull. If you've watched my Minotaur video, you'll know this resulted in the birth of the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature kept in a labyrinth beneath Minos' palace. After this strange union, Poseidon drove the bull mad. The crazed creature rampaged across Crete, causing widespread destruction. Although Heracles was not destined to kill the Minotaur, that task belonged to the hero Theseus. King Minos wanted Heracles to capture the mad bull. Confident from his previous battles, Heracles set out to find the bull. When the enormous beast charged at him, Heracles skillfully grabbed it by the horns and wrestled it to the ground. They struggled for hours until the bull, exhausted, finally submitted. As the bull was a child of Poseidon, it had the ability to walk on water. Heracles mounted the creature and rode it across the sea to Mycenae. Upon arrival, Eurystheus was horrified to see yet another mythical beast and once again hid in a storage jar, refusing to come out until Heracles had removed the bull. Not wanting to kill an animal sacred to Poseidon, Heracles released the bull outside the palace. The bull continued to wreak havoc on the Greek mainland until it was eventually caught and killed by Theseus. For his 8th labor, Heracles was tasked with bringing the mares of the Thracian king Diomedes to Eurystheus. These were no ordinary horses. They were fearsome creatures known to breathe fire, and their aggression was heightened by Diomedes' practice of feeding them the flesh of unsuspecting guests and strangers. Heracles set off for Thrace, accompanied by his friend and lover Abderus, the son of Hermes. Upon arrival, the pair made their way to Diomedes' palace, where they saw the fire-breathing mares. The horses were chained to the palace wall with cast iron, thrashing and foaming at the mouth. Beside them lay a bucket of human flesh, which distressed Abderus, making him hesitant to enter the palace. He decided to wait outside, while Heracles went inside to negotiate. Heracles approached King Diomedes, a repulsive man with a nauseating stench. His eyes darting around in madness, and blood caked under his fingernails from feeding the mares. Despite his revulsion, Heracles composed himself and began negotiations for the horses. Suddenly, a scream echoed from outside. Heracles rushed out and witnessed in horror as the mares tore into the corpse of his young lover, Abderus, who had gotten too close out of curiosity. Overcome with rage, Heracles charged back into the palace, killing the guards and grabbing Diomedes by the hair, dragging him outside. He threw the king to the mares, giving him a taste of his own medicine. The mares devoured their master, but the flesh of Diomedes was so foul that they stopped halfway, forever put off the taste of human flesh. With the horses now docile, Heracles took hold of their chains and led them back to Eurystheus. Disappointed by their newfound passivity, King Eurystheus put the mares in his personal stable, adding them to his royal collection. For his 9th labor, Heracles was tasked with retrieving the Girdle of Hippolyta, a gold and leather belt that ensured victory in battle. This task wasn't given by King Eurystheus, but by his daughter, Admete. Admete admired Heracles, but she admired someone even more, the fabled queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta. The Amazons, warrior women living at the edges of the known world, were renowned for their combat prowess and dominance over local tribes. Their leader, Queen Hippolyta, daughter of the war god Ares, had received a magical girdle from her father, ensuring she never fell in battle. It was this girdle that Admete desired. Heracles set off east, accompanied by a small band of warriors, in case they had to fight the Amazons. Upon arrival, Heracles was surprised by the Amazons' hospitality. They offered his men food and shelter, a far cry from the ferocious hostility he had anticipated. Hippolyta herself showed particular interest in Heracles, having heard of his legendary quests. She invited him into her private residence, where she questioned him about his adventures. The two got along well, and Heracles grew reluctant to take the girdle by force. He decided to be honest, explaining his 9th labor and Admete's wish. To his surprise, Hippolyta was willing to give him the girdle as a sign of friendship, placing it in his hands without hesitation. But Hera, unable to tolerate Heracles' success and seething with hatred, decided to intervene. Disguising herself as an Amazon, she infiltrated the camp, spreading seeds of distrust. She convinced the Amazons that Heracles had come to enslave them and kidnap Hippolyta. Outraged, The Amazons mounted their horses and charged at Heracles' men. Hearing the commotion, Heracles rushed outside to find the Amazons slaughtering his friends. Believing Hippolyta had betrayed him, he turned back and in a fit of rage struck her dead before she could explain. Her girdle did not protect her, as she had already gifted it to Heracles. Heracles then fought his way through the enraged Amazons, managing to save a few of his companions, and they quickly fled the camp, heading back to Mycenae. Upon his return, Heracles handed the girdle to Admete, sparing her the gruesome details of its acquisition. Eurystheus, frustrated with Heracles' continual success, decided to send him to the furthest place he could think of, the island of Erythea, hoping to delay his cousin's return and avoid dealing with him for a while. For his 10th labor, Heracles was sent to Erythea to steal the Cattle of Geryon, a fearsome giant with 3 heads. Heracles embarked on the long journey to the edge of the world, traveling southwest along the African coastline. Unaccustomed to the scorching heat of the continent, Heracles soon grew irritated with the sun itself. Halfway across the Libyan desert, he took out his bow and threatened to shoot the sun with one of his poisoned arrows if it continued to torment him. Alarmed by this threat, the sun descended in its human form as the god Helios begged Heracles not to shoot. Helios promised to shine less intensely while Heracles was on his journey and offered him his great golden cup, a vessel shaped like a water lily that Helios used to sail across the ocean at night. Grateful for the god's gift, Heracles quickly continued his journey in the magical cup. Reaching the entrance to the Atlantic Ocean, he celebrated his voyage by setting up 2 pillars, one on the African side and the other on the European side. These would later be known as the Pillars of Hercules, which are today identified as Ceuta on the African side and the Rock of Gibraltar on the European side. As Heracles continued his journey, he encountered stormy waters. Frustrated, he once again drew his arrows, this time threatening the great Titan Oceanus. Fearing the poisoned arrows, Oceanus calmed the waves, allowing Heracles to proceed. Upon arriving at the island of Erythea, Heracles quickly located the herd of cattle and their owner, the giant Geryon. Before Heracles could confront Geryon, he was met by the cattle's giant herdsman, Eurytion, the son of Ares, and Orthrus, a 2-headed dog and brother of Cerberus. Heracles swiftly dispatched them with his club. Eager to finish the labor, Heracles did not engage in a prolonged fight with Geryon. Instead, he shot the 3-headed giant with a poisoned arrow, killing him instantly. Heracles then herded the cattle into Helios's cup and set sail for home. However, upon arriving in Greece, Hera intervened once more. She sent a swarm of gadflies to sting the cattle, causing them to scatter, with some running off into the Thracian mountains. Heracles pursued them, but could not recapture all the cattle. Eventually, he returned to Mycenae with the remaining herd, gave the magic cup back to Helios, and delivered the cattle to Eurystheus, who sacrificed them to Hera. Believing he was finally free, 10 years and 10 labors later, Heracles prepared to walk away, cleansed of his past crimes. Yet Hera had visited Eurystheus the night before and reminded him of the original terms. Heracles was to complete his tasks with no assistance and no payment. Since Heracles had received help from his nephew Iolaus in defeating the Lernaean Hydra and had accepted payment from King Augean for cleaning the stables, even though he didn't receive it, Eurystheus declared that Heracles still owed him 2 more labors. Much to Heracles' dismay, Eurystheus revealed that his next tasks would be the hardest yet. For his 11th labor, Heracles was tasked with traveling to the garden of the Hesperides to collect the golden apples that granted immortality. These apples grew on a tree guarded by a 100-headed dragon named Ladon, sent by Hera. Adding to the difficulty, the garden's location was unknown. Heracles began his quest by visiting the Titan Prometheus, who might know the garden's whereabouts. Zeus had punished Prometheus for giving fire to humanity by chaining him to a rock, and an eagle ate his liver daily. This cycle had continued for centuries until Heracles found Prometheus, broke his chains, and shot the eagle. Grateful, Prometheus revealed the garden's location, but warned that no mortal could pluck the golden apples. Instead, he suggested Heracles seek help from the Titan Atlas, who lived nearby. Ignoring Prometheus's advice, Heracles climbed over the garden's great wall and confronted Ladon. He swiftly killed the dragon with a poisoned arrow, but when he tried to pick an apple, it vanished. Prometheus had been right. Accepting the need for help, Heracles went to find Atlas. Atlas, sentenced by Zeus to hold up the sky for eternity, was grateful for Heracles' offer to temporarily bear his burden. In exchange, Atlas agreed to fetch the golden apples. Relieved of his burden even for a short time, Atlas went to the garden while Heracles took the sky upon his shoulders. The weight was immense, and even Heracles struggled, his body shaking and muscles cramping as time passed. As the sun set, Atlas returned with a basket of golden apples. Relieved, Heracles thanked him and prepared to hand back the sky. Atlas, reluctant to resume his punishment, offered to deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself. Realizing Atlas's ploy, Heracles agreed, but asked Atlas to hold the sky momentarily so he could adjust his pelt for better comfort. Unsuspecting, Atlas took back the sky, and Heracles swiftly picked up the apples and bade farewell, leaving the Titan to curse him in frustration. Returning to Eurystheus, Heracles presented the golden apples. Eurystheus, impressed but trying not to show it, knew from Hera that the apples belonged in the sacred garden. He left them in Athena's temple overnight, and the goddess returned them to their rightful place. For his 12th and final labor, Heracles was tasked with capturing Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of the Underworld. As he began his journey, Hermes, the messenger god, appeared before him. Knowing that Heracles could not navigate the dark and winding halls of the dead alone, Hermes offered to guide his half-brother. He advised Heracles to seek permission from Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the Underworld, to avoid incurring their wrath. Grateful for the advice, Heracles and Hermes made their way to Hades' palace. Upon reaching the palace, Heracles explained his task to Hades and Persephone. Hades, knowing that aiding Heracles would anger Hera, allowed him to take Cerberus under two conditions. Heracles must use no weapons to capture the dog, and Cerberus must be returned once the task was complete. Heracles agreed to these terms and set out to confront the beast. Just as he had with the Nemean Lion and the Cretan Bull, Heracles wrestled with Cerberus, grappling with the formidable creature for hours until it was exhausted. With his club in one hand and Cerberus in the other, Heracles dragged the chained dog back to the realm of the living. As he approached the river Styx, the spirit of Medusa briefly appeared before him, then vanished into one of the Underworld's tunnels. Startled, Heracles drew his sword, but soon encountered the spirit of his old friend, Meleager. Meleager shared news of his recent death and they conversed. In honor of Meleager, Heracles offered to marry his sister, Deianira. Grateful, Meleager thanked Heracles before fading back among the spirits of the dead. Heracles then delivered Cerberus to King Eurystheus, who once again hid in his jar, now a permanent fixture beside his throne. Shaking with fear, Eurystheus peeked out and agreed to release Heracles from his servitude, pardoning him for his past crimes. Heracles was overjoyed. He had finally atoned for his past and was now a free man. Before embarking on his next journey, he fulfilled his promise and returned Cerberus to the Underworld. Heracles took some time to celebrate when he returned, enjoying all the pleasures of a free life. He was now a well-renowned hero and had admirers wherever he went. He continued to embark on adventures, even joining Jason and the Argonauts on their quest for the Golden Fleece. Eventually, Heracles decided to fulfill the promise he had made to the spirit of Meleager during his final labor. He found Meleager's sister, Deianira, and took her as his wife. As the newlywed couple journeyed to their new home in the city of Tiryns, they came across a rapid river that they needed to cross. On the other bank stood a centaur who offered to carry Deianira across on his back. Heracles accepted the offer, not recognizing the centaur as Nessus, the sole survivor of the massacre Heracles had committed against the centaur tribe during his fourth labor. Nessus had spent over a decade plotting his revenge, now seeing the perfect opportunity to execute his plan. Once Nessus reached the other side of the river, he threw Deianira to the ground and attempted to violate her. Seeing this from the opposite bank, Heracles pulled out his bow and shot Nessus through the chest with a poisoned arrow, causing the centaur to collapse in agonizing pain. With his last breaths, Nessus apologized to Deianira and offered her a gift as a means of apology. He claimed that his blood had magical love properties, instructing Deianira to collect it in a vial in case Heracles ever fell in love with another woman. As Nessus died, Deianira collected his blood, unaware that she had set the stage for her husband's demise. The couple lived happily in Tiryns for a time and had several children. However, after a few years, Heracles grew restless and craved the excitement of his younger days. Seeking adventure, he left his family behind and set out to the kingdom of Oechalia, ruled by his old archery tutor, King Eurytus. Upon his arrival, it took only a few days for Heracles to fall in love with Eurytus's daughter Iole. The king was holding an archery tournament to decide who would marry Iole, and Heracles decided to enter. When Heracles won, Eurytus refused to hand over his daughter, having heard of how Heracles had murdered his first family and fearing for Iole's safety. Furious, Heracles stormed out of the palace, but later returned to kidnap Iole, along with other women from the city. He brought them back home to Tiryns, where Deianira and his children were living. Although initially happy to see her husband return, Deianira grew worried upon seeing the captive women, especially noticing the way Heracles looked at Iole. Suspecting infidelity, Deianira, in desperation, retrieved Nessus's blood, hoping its supposed love properties would win Heracles back. She smeared the blood on a robe and gifted it to Heracles, asking him to wear it to dinner that evening. As soon as Heracles put on the robe, he felt something was wrong. Nessus's blood adhered to his skin, causing a horrific burning sensation. Heracles screamed in agony, trying to tear off the robe, but only managed to rip off large chunks of his flesh in the process. Nessus had planned this all along, knowing Heracles would shoot him with a poisoned arrow. By convincing Deianira to collect his blood tainted with Hydra poison, Nessus ensured that Heracles would suffer the same agonizing death he had inflicted on the centaurs. Heracles' torment lasted for hours. In despair, Deianira hanged herself upon realizing what she had done. Knowing his death was imminent, Heracles frantically ran around his courtyard, uprooting trees to construct a funeral pyre. Once assembled, he lay down upon it and asked one of his friends to set it alight. As the fire consumed his body, Heracles smiled, finally released from his pain. At that moment, a great storm cloud gathered around the pyre. Zeus, watching from the cloud, saw the mortal part of his son burn away. The god then seized Heracles' spirit and took him to Olympus, where he transformed him into an immortal.